Jake never imagined his life would be turned upside down by something as bizarre as an alien walking into his lab. He was the kind of person who spent most of his time buried in his work, solving complex engineering problems and pushing the boundaries of technology. At 27, he had already earned a reputation as one of the brightest young engineers at his company, but that reputation was about to mean nothing. It started as an ordinary afternoon. The quiet hum of machines filled the air in the small, cluttered lab where Jake worked. The only sound besides his typing was the occasional beep from his devices, as he tinkered with the latest model of a neural network chip. His eyes were focused on the screen, his mind lost in the intricacies of the circuitry. It was the kind of peaceful solitude Jake enjoyed. It allowed him to think clearly, without distractions. Suddenly, the door to his lab swung open with a force that rattled the walls. Jake's heart skipped a beat, and he turned, expecting to see one of his colleagues, maybe a late-night worker like himself, or a technician with a request. Instead, what he saw took all the breath from his lungs and left him frozen in place, staring. A figure stood in the doorway, so tall that she had to bend slightly to fit under the doorframe. The first thing Jake noticed was the color of her skin. It was glowing, a brilliant shade of blue that seemed to shimmer as though she were made of light itself. Her eyes were an impossible shade of orange, bright enough to make him squint even though she was several feet away. They were so intense, they felt as if they could pierce right through him. She wasn't wearing anything like the typical clothes Jake was used to seeing on Earth. Instead, her body radiated a kind of energy, and her form was perfectly smooth, as if she were made of a fluid substance, not solid at all. Her hair was unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't hair at all. It was an ethereal mass of swirling energy, like the aurora borealis in the sky, flickering and changing colors. As it moved in time with her thoughts, Jake's mouth went dry. His mind was racing, but his body didn't respond. This was no costume or prank. This was something entirely different. He didn't even know how to react, let alone what to say. Who are you?" was all he could manage to whisper. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, filled with disbelief. The figure stepped into the room with slow, deliberate movements, her every motion graceful and precise. As she closed the distance between them, the air seemed to shimmer around her, thickening as though her presence altered the very atmosphere. She stopped just a few feet away from him, looking down at him with those intense, glowing eyes. The silence between them felt heavy, oppressive, as if the world had stopped just for this moment. "I am Kalisha," she said, her voice both commanding and melodic. "I am the heir to the Star Dominion." The words echoed in Jake's head, but he could barely process them. "The heir to the what?" he stammered, blinking rapidly. He had no idea what she was talking about. "Star Dominion," she repeated, slowly, as though explaining something very simple to a child. "It is the name of my people, the rulers of countless worlds in the galaxy. And now, you and I are bound by fate." Jake's eyes widened. The words didn't make any sense to him. He was just an engineer. What could he possibly have to do with an alien, much less the heir to some galactic empire? His brain was scrambling to make sense of it all. "This can't be happening," he thought. "This must be some kind of joke. But why does she look so real? Why does she feel so real?" Before Jake could say another word, Kalisha continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "You saw me," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, her gaze now focused on him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "You saw me exposed, human. And now, there is no escape from the law of my people." Jake's mind tried to wrap itself around what she was saying, but the words didn't connect. Saw her exposed? What was she talking about? He hadn't seen anything. She had just walked into the room, fully clothed. And then what? His brain tried to come up with an explanation, but it couldn't. "What do you mean, exposed?" Jake asked, his voice sounding unsure, almost desperate for a reasonable answer. Kalicia's eyes softened for just a moment, and she sighed deeply, as though the weight of her predicament were too much to bear. "It is the law of my people. If a human witnesses me in my most private form, my most vulnerable form, then the only way to prevent both our destruction is for us to be bound together. You and I must marry. There is no other way." Jake blinked again, trying to digest what she had just said. "Marry you?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "I didn't do anything. I don't even know you. Why would how could I, marry you?" But Kalicia wasn't finished. Her tone became more urgent, more insistent. "You do not understand, human. The law is absolute. It cannot be ignored. If you refuse, if you do not marry me, both our lives will be destroyed. My existence will cease, and so will yours. That is the price for seeing me exposed." The words hung in the air between them like a deadly weight, heavy with finality. Jake opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His brain was struggling to process what was happening. This was not real. It couldn't be real. Yet, here she was, standing before him, an alien, talking about a law that would end his life if he didn't marry her. In the space of just a few minutes, everything Jake thought he knew about the world had been shattered. The peaceful life he had built for himself, his comfortable routine, none of it mattered anymore. Now, he was faced with an impossible choice: marry this alien woman or face certain death. The weight of her words settled in his chest like a stone, suffocating him with their gravity. "I didn't ask for this," Jake muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He wanted to scream, to demand that this absurdity end, but the reality was clear. He had no choice. He couldn't escape. Not now. Not with Kalicia standing there, so certain of her words, her fate already sealed. He felt trapped. And for the first time in his life, Jake realized there were things in this universe far beyond his understanding, and no way to escape them. Jake stood there, still frozen, unable to fully grasp what was happening. He had expected a normal day in the lab, filled with equations and gadgets, maybe a little frustration from a stubborn machine, but nothing like this. His thoughts raced, colliding with one another like a storm in his mind. He glanced at Kalicia, her tall figure looming before him, every movement graceful, almost hypnotic. The intensity of her gaze never wavered, her glowing orange eyes trained on him as if she were waiting for him to understand the gravity of her words. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as the weight of her statement settled on him like a leaden blanket. What did she mean by exposed? He had seen her, yes, but she had been fully clothed when she entered his lab. He tried to make sense of it, to form a logical explanation, but everything about this moment was defying logic. Aliens weren't real, and certainly, they didn't operate on strange, nonsensical laws that bound people to a fate they couldn't escape. Jake wasn't one to believe in conspiracy theories or strange happenings. He was a scientist, a man, of reason, facts, and evidence. And yet, here he was, standing face to face with a being from another world, one who claimed that the mere sight of her was enough to seal his fate. His mind flickered back to that moment when she had first entered the room. He had noticed her, of course. Who wouldn't? She was something out of a dream or a nightmare. But how could that one encounter have set in motion such a dire consequence? Kalicia's voice cut through his thoughts, steady, unwavering. "I understand this is difficult to believe," she said, her words slow, almost gentle. "But it is the truth. My people, the Dominion, follow the ancient laws passed down for millennia. It is not something I can change, nor you. If a human sees me in a state of vulnerability, If they witness what I truly am beneath the energy fields that shield my body, they must marry me to ensure both of our survival. If we do not follow this law, we will both perish. The fate of the one who sees me is sealed, just as mine is." Jake's throat tightened. Every word she spoke seemed to carry an unimaginable weight, as if the universe itself were demanding his compliance. How could he possibly be expected to believe this? He was no fool, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. This alien standing in front of him, making demands that felt absurd and impossible to fulfill. And yet, looking into her eyes, he could not deny the conviction in her voice, the certainty of her words. She didn't seem like a liar. No, she seemed desperate. Desperate for him to understand, for him to make a choice, even though that choice felt impossible. "I didn't mean to see you." "I don't even understand what I saw," Jake mumbled, his voice shaking with confusion. "I don't even know what's going on. One minute I'm working and the next, an alien is standing in front of me, telling me I'm supposed to marry you? This is insane." Kalisha didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of anger. Instead, she merely nodded, her expression somber. "I know it is difficult, but it is the law of my people. We cannot avoid it." She took a step closer, her presence almost overwhelming now, the air around her thick with energy, as though every breath she took carried the weight of 1,000 worlds. "You have no choice, human. If you refuse, both of us will die." Jake felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He wanted to argue, to find some way out of this madness, but every time he opened his mouth, the words failed him. What could he possibly say? How could he explain the impossibility of marrying an alien, a being from a distant star system, a woman who had appeared out of nowhere, claiming a bond that he had no knowledge of, no connection to? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts, to sort through the chaos in his mind. Was there any other way? Could he find a loophole in her story, something to prove this was all a mistake? But as he opened his eyes and looked at her again, he knew there was no escaping her gaze, no denying the power she held over him, over his very existence. "I don't even know how marriage works on your planet, or what you expect from me," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a guy. I've never even thought about marrying anyone, let alone you." His words trailed off into a painful silence. Kalisha regarded him with a mixture of sympathy and understanding, as if she had heard his doubts before, as if she knew how overwhelming the situation was for him. "The concept of marriage is universal," Kalisha replied softly, though her tone was firm, as though she were explaining something simple. "It is a bond between two beings who are linked by fate, a connection that transcends boundaries. For you, this may seem impossible, but for me, it is necessary. Our worlds may be different, but the laws of the universe are not so easily ignored." Jake's head swam with the weight of her words. She spoke with such certainty, as though this was as natural as breathing. The thought of marriage, of commitment, felt like a distant concept in his world. But now, this alien, this stranger from another galaxy, was offering him a choice that was not a choice at all. If he refused, they would both die. If he accepted, he would have to bind himself to her, a woman who was not human, who was from another world, bound by laws he could not understand. And yet, there was something about Kalisha that was compelling. Despite the strangeness of the situation, there was an undeniable magnetism in her presence. She wasn't like any human woman Jake had ever met. Her strength, her confidence, her aura of power, it was as if she was made of something more than just flesh and bone. She seemed to carry the weight of the universe with her, and in that moment, Jake felt as though he was standing on the edge of something monumental, something that could change his life forever. "I don't want to die," Jake admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But this is insane." Kalisha's eyes softened. She stepped closer, reaching out and placing a hand gently on his shoulder. I know, human. I know. But this is our reality now. You and I are bound together, whether you like it or not. You will marry me, or we will both face the consequences. It is the only way. Jake swallowed hard, trying to find his breath. He could feel the walls closing in on him, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His life had just been turned upside down, and he had no idea how to navigate this new, strange world that Kalisha had thrust him into. All he knew was that he was caught in a situation with no easy way out. Jake's mind reeled as he stood in front of Kalisha, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a stone crushing him from all sides. Her hands, delicate and yet imbued with an unearthly strength, still rested gently on his shoulder, grounding him to this reality he could no longer deny. It was surreal, like he had stepped into a story from some alien novel, but now it was his life. Nothing had prepared him for this. No amount of academic knowledge or reasoning had equipped him to handle a situation where an alien demanded that he marry her to save both their lives. It wasn't just an impossible request, it was a demand woven into the very fabric of his existence, one that he had no way to escape. She was right about one thing: he had no choice. If what she said was true, if the law of her people was as strict as she made it out to be, they would both be doomed if he refused. But as the silence stretched between them, Jake's mind began to churn. He had no idea what marrying Kalisha truly meant. What would their lives look like afterward? Was this just some formality, some strange cosmic law that had to be obeyed? Or was there something deeper at play here? He couldn't fathom it. The more he thought, the more confused he became. In the safety of his mind, he imagined running, finding a way to escape this alien law. But the reality was too powerful, too inescapable. The consequences of defiance were real, and Jake had no intention of testing whether Kalisha's words were a threat or a promise. He looked at her, the sharp lines of her features softened by an unexpected vulnerability, and for the first time, he understood the gravity of the situation. Her gaze met his, her orange eyes almost glowing, and he saw a flicker of something he hadn't expected: fear. Kalisha, despite all her strength, despite her alien nature, was afraid. He realized that she wasn't commanding him out of cruelty or arrogance. She wasn't imposing her will simply to exert control. No, it seemed as though she too was caught in the web of some ancient law, one that even she had no power to break. It dawned on Jake then that her struggle was just as real as his. Kalisha, the powerful alien, was just as much a prisoner of fate as he was. I don't know what to do, Jake confessed, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. He hated feeling vulnerable, especially in front of someone like Kalisha, someone who seemed so far beyond him in strength and experience. But in that moment, he couldn't hide his uncertainty. This wasn't just about alien laws or strange rituals. It was about his survival and her survival, and the impossible reality they now found themselves trapped in. Kalisha's hand slid off his shoulder, and she stepped back, her eyes never leaving his face. I understand, she said, her voice low and almost soothing. This is not easy for you. You're not the first to face such a decision. She paused for a moment, her gaze hardening, as though recalling something distant, painful. I have seen many humans in your position. Many have resisted, fought, tried to escape. But it always ends the same way. The law cannot be broken, and the consequences are dire. It is not just our lives that are at risk. It is the balance of the universe itself. Her words hung in the air like a warning, echoing in Jake's mind. The balance of the universe. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but somehow, it felt like more than just their lives at stake. It felt like the entire cosmos had been set in motion by their fates, like this moment had been building for eons. It felt like something far greater than both of them had conspired to bring them together, and to force him into this impossible choice. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Jake admitted, his voice shaking slightly. How can I be? You're an alien. This is insane. I'm just a regular guy. I've never even been in a serious relationship, let alone... He stopped, unable to finish the thought. The words didn't even make sense in his mind, but the truth was staring at him, undeniable. This was real. This was happening. Kalisha studied him, her expression unreadable. You do not need to be ready, she said. You will be ready. This bond is not something you choose. It is something you are bound to. We are already connected in ways you cannot yet understand. Her voice softened slightly, and she took a step closer, her presence overwhelming but oddly comforting. I know this is difficult, but I will not force you. You have a choice, human. You can choose to marry me, and we will survive. Or you can choose to refuse, and we will both die. There is no other way. Jake swallowed hard. The words didn't just hang in the air. They pressed on him, squeezing the breath from his chest. He wanted to say no. He wanted to scream, to tell her that this was madness, that he wasn't the one for her, that he couldn't be bound by some alien law. But the reality of what was at stake was too clear. He saw the fear in her eyes, and despite everything, he realized he didn't want to be the one to doom them both. He had always been a man of logic, a man who believed that every problem had a solution. But this was different. There was no solution, no logic to apply here. The universe had already made its decision. I don't want to die, Jake said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like an admission of defeat, but they were also the truth. He didn't want to die. Not like this. Not at the hands of some ancient cosmic law that he had no control over. But I don't understand what this means. What does it mean for me? For us? Kalisha's gaze softened even more, and she reached out, touching his arm. Her fingers were cool, almost like the surface of a gemstone. It means that you are bound to me now, she said. Not just by the law of my people, but by something deeper. We are connected, human. And you will find that, in time, this connection will make sense to you. It is not a curse, though it may seem so now. It is a bond that transcends all things. Jake looked into her eyes, searching for some sign that this was a joke, some indication that he was being tested. But there was no sign of humor, no trickery. Kalisha's face was set with an expression of solemnity, of someone who had long accepted her fate and was now offering him a glimpse of the path ahead. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something greater than either of them. And in that moment, Jake understood. There was no escaping it. The universe had already made its decision, and now he had to accept the truth. There was only one choice. The weight of Kalisha's words had settled heavily on Jake's chest, and every breath felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. The last few moments seemed to stretch forever, and Jake's mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and the undeniable truth that this decision was beyond him. He had never imagined being in a situation like this, caught between the laws of an alien world and the fragile life he had known. But now, as he stood before Kalisha, he realized there was no turning back. He had been thrust into a destiny that neither of them could escape. The silence between them was heavy, and Kalisha, sensing his inner turmoil, did not rush him. She had offered him the choice, but she knew as well as he did that the weight of it was immense. She, too, had never wanted to be bound by this law, never wished to force someone into this impossible situation. Yet, the laws of her people were clear, unyielding. Refusal meant death, for both of them. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about the bond that had been formed between them, a bond beyond understanding, beyond reason. Jake had no idea what that bond truly meant, what it would mean for their future. But the reality of their situation pressed on him with a weight too heavy to ignore. Kalicia's gaze softened, and she took a small step closer to him. She had explained what would happen, what the consequences of refusing would be. And she saw the doubt still clouding his features. He was fighting something inside himself, torn between his instinct to resist and the cold, undeniable truth that there was no way out. He couldn't escape fate, not this time. But Kalicia knew that Jake wasn't just resisting because he feared death. He was resisting because, on some level, he couldn't fathom the reality of what he was being asked to do. How could anyone understand such a strange alien law? How could anyone accept such a cosmic bond that tied their fate to someone they barely knew? "I know this is hard," Kalicia said softly, her voice filled with an unexpected gentleness. "I am not asking you to make this decision lightly. I cannot imagine the fear you must feel. But please, understand that this bond is not something to be feared. It is a gift, a force that connects us in ways that are beyond your comprehension. This bond will shape your destiny, and in time, you will come to see that it is not a curse. It is the only way we both survive. The only way we both live." She paused, her eyes searching his face for some sign of understanding, some flicker of acceptance. Jake stared at her, trying to process her words. There was a deep sincerity in her eyes, something raw and vulnerable that he hadn't expected from an alien queen, from someone who seemed so sure of herself, so powerful. She wasn't just a stranger, a faceless alien. She was a creature bound by a law she couldn't escape, just like him. She wasn't just asking him to marry her because of some cosmic contract. She was asking him to accept the unexplainable, to trust in a bond that neither of them fully understood. It wasn't just her survival on the line, it was his as well, Kalicia's. Words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't help but think about the strange connection that had begun to grow between them. It was subtle at first, like a whisper in the back of his mind, but now it was undeniable. Every time their eyes met, there was something there, something that went beyond mere physical attraction or curiosity. It was as though their souls were already intertwined, and the more he resisted, the more that bond seemed to tighten. He couldn't explain it, couldn't put it into words, but it was real. It was happening. He felt it in his bones, in the very air around them. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just a forced marriage. It was something much deeper, something that transcended the physical and the immediate. "You keep saying this bond will shape my destiny," Jake said, his voice low, almost to himself. "But I don't know what that means. What does it mean for me? For us? I don't understand how I'm supposed to just accept this. I'm not prepared for this kind of connection." His words felt weak, desperate, but they were all he had to offer. How could he be expected to just accept something so alien to him, something so far beyond his comprehension? Kalicia's expression softened further, and she reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm once more. "I do not expect you to understand everything right away. No one does. But in time, you will come to see that this bond is the most important thing you will ever experience. It is not just about survival. It is about strength, unity, and a shared purpose that is greater than anything we can do alone. Our fates are tied together now, human. And I will help you understand. I will guide you." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He had never been one for grand destinies or cosmic forces shaping his life. He was a man of science, of logic. He believed in reason, in facts, not in fate or destiny. But this was different. There was no logical explanation for it. No matter how much he tried to reason with himself, he couldn't deny what was happening. The bond between them was real. It had already been formed. And now, there was no escape. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. For a moment, everything felt overwhelming. suffocating. But when he opened his eyes again, he saw Kalisha standing before him, waiting patiently, her expression kind, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or trust. It was as though she was offering him a piece of herself, asking him to take it, to accept it. She wasn't just asking him to marry her for survival, she was asking him to accept her as a partner, a companion in a universe they both now had to navigate together. Jake looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just an alien but a person, someone who, like him, was caught in the flow of forces beyond her control. He saw her not as a stranger, but as someone who was willing to face this destiny, this bond, with him. And in that moment, he realized that he wasn't alone in this. He didn't know what would happen next, what kind of life they would lead, or what this bond would truly mean for them. But one thing was certain: whatever the future held, he had no choice but to accept it. He had to choose her. He had to choose this impossible, unexplainable connection that was now a part of both their lives. "I don't know what the future holds," Jake said, his voice steadying, "but I'm willing to try. I'll marry you, Kalisha. I'll do whatever it takes to survive." Kalisha's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and something more, something that spoke of gratitude and understanding. "You have made the right choice," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "Together, we will face whatever comes, and together, we will shape our destiny."